20 years ago, I started a revolution. But not exactly. 20 years ago, I stumbled upon a new leadership and management structure that has carried me through my career. And it all started with asking a simple question: do you need a full-time CFO? To help you understand why I asked this question, I need to back up a little. As CFO, I had just sold a company to VMware. Right before that, I had a year with an investment bank. Right before that, I had a year with a very small but high-growth firm as their head of finance and accounting. When I sold that company, first person they let go is the CFO. That's fine. But I was out in the job market. I felt strong, right? 3 years credentials, ready to go. I knew what I was doing. Bam, brick wall, 2007, 2008 recession, right? Thousands of CFOs out of work. And most of them had 10, 15, 20 years more experience than I had. So I was stuck. And I started to think, what am I going to do? First thing I did, of course, I think like everybody else, I panicked, right? How do I get a job? What am I going to do? I looked around and I started thinking about the practical problem that I had. I needed work. And to be honest, I needed to eat, and food cost money. So I decided to keep looking, and one day I was introduced to a CEO that needed my expertise. It was amazing. He needed me, I needed him. First thing he said was, we can't pay a full-time CFO. It wasn't your credentials, it wasn't anything else. Can't afford you. And I thought for a moment, and I said, well, what if I could do the same job for a day a week? His face looked quizzical. And I continued on. I said, well, why don't I do a day a week and solve some of your problems and we can move on from there? He turned to me and he said, that's exactly what we need. When can you start? Right at that moment, he hired me on the spot, and then he turned to me and said, welcome aboard. And I realized at that point that was the beginning of multiple CFO engagements. So many, in fact, that I actually ended up having more work than I could handle. And that's an interesting problem to have in the middle of a recession. As I went through this learning process, there were no books to help me understand what I was getting into. There were no guidelines, no manuals, no courses, as we're seeing at some universities pop up. There was no conferences. There was no help. There was no community guidelines on what to do. So I learned it myself. I did it for many years, and what I started to see was more and more companies embracing this new way of leadership, new way of hiring executives. I thought, okay, can it work? Now, going back, at that time, I never thought I'd be doing it for 20 years. I never thought that after 16 years, I'd be a doctoral student studying this very same topic, but here I am. As I started to realize this, I started looking around for other executives that were going to start doing this type of work. It was amazing. More and more people popped up, more and more people asking for my advice. As we went further a few more years, what I noticed with the expansion was, what's next? Am I going to do this for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years like it ended up being? So fast forward a little bit and you look at 2025. I was asked to assist on a book chapter and ended up writing the whole thing. And I was asked to assist on a journal article and ended up writing most of it. It was on fractional leadership. The first thing I did was I started looking at all the literature, right? What do we do as a researcher? We go to Google Scholar, we go to other areas, and we look for papers, look for articles. Very little. In fact, when I say very little, I mean very, very little. What had happened was there was a few blogs, there was a few, what I would say is conversations, conceptual. And then I saw one article in a peer-reviewed journal by So and Tectectoni. I probably got that wrong, and I'll apologize later for that, but that's what happens. One article. I want you to imagine only finding one article peer-reviewed on the subject. So I wrote my articles and see if we could get some traction. For that first book chapter, one of the things I did was went to Google Trends and looked up fractional CFO. And what I noticed very quickly was, at that time, this was 2025, up until 2024, we had seen quite a market increase. Let's say about 10x in interest in that term over 15 years. Currently I'm looking at my dissertation. I'm defending it now. It's on fractional CFO leadership styles. But I reran that report, and what I found was between 2021 and today, there's a 2,400% increase in the interest of fractional CFO. That's doubled every year for 5 years. Some people would argue that's a supply, that's a demand, that's somewhere in between, but the marketplace for fractional CFOs has exploded. At the same time, what I noticed was fractional CMO, fractional CRO, CEO, CTO, CIO were all popping up in more popularity. This complete change in the way you hire executives, the way you engage executives, has exploded, and it's even exploding internationally now. I'm getting more and more phone calls internationally to help look into this topic. Let's go back to the research for a moment. Very little research even today, 2026, on the topic. I think I found 4 journal articles, including my own, in published works. So now imagine, as a researcher, you have a brand new field completely open that can explore every aspect of fractional leadership. Emotional intelligence. How do you hire fractional leaders? Are they more diverse than other leaders? Do they manage better? How do you manage the outcome of a fractional executive versus a full-time executive? Then start looking at what other places could you use this model. It's been used in nonprofits where you have fractional CEOs that work on both sides of the fence. But could you use it in an academic setting? Could you use it in other settings where you need that executive expertise? So that was my story, wrapping it back up. At the end of this, 20 years ago, I never thought I would be, first, a fractional executive for 20 years, and second, a doctoral student studying fractional executive leadership. But I had a practical solution to a practical problem. I implemented it. And then today, I'm asking other researchers to look into their toolbox and maybe start looking at fractional leadership as something that they could also work on. Thank you.